Remember 9/11. It's the battle cry of every patriotic spirit. We are told to remember 9/11 all the time and everywhere, from t-shirts to license plates to the documentaries that play every year. But what about the American youth? Even as teenagers that were mere tots at the time of 9/11, we know it's an important event, but do we know just how much impact 9/11 really had?
So I was 6 years old and I had just woken up and our family ritual was I was going to eat some bowl of cereal. So the events transpired over the course of a few hours, and so at first I was eating some cereal. The background noise, my mom had the TV on and she was watching it, she was glued to it, but I didn't really understand what was transpiring, and no one really did at the beginning. But as time went on, we started getting ready for school, and my mom dropped us off, and my older brother looked at me and he said, "Blake, don't tell anyone." And I didn't know what he was talking about, but I was pretty afraid. And then I remember later in the afternoon, our teacher came on and said, "Tomorrow we'll let you know about school tomorrow." And that's where I was at.
While 9/11 was a surprise to the American public, was such an event foreshadowed? To answer this question and many more, we have had the special opportunity to speak with Trevor Rosenberg, who was in the armed forces during the 9/11 attacks. In fact, there had been multiple terrorist attack events on a much smaller scale between the US and Al-Qaeda since 1993. In August of 1998, the US government even recognized the attacks as a part of a jihad declared by Osama bin Laden and the Taliban. A jihad is an Islamic term meaning holy war, or a war engaged based on countering a religious doctrine or a practice that fundamentally conflicts with one's own. Osama bin Laden was the founder of the terrorist group Al-Qaeda. Both him and Al-Qaeda took responsibility for the 9/11 attacks and various other terrorist actions. The actual attack that is 9/11 consisted of 4 coordinated terrorist attacks by Islamic terrorist group Al-Qaeda, American Airlines Flight 11 and United Airlines Flight 175 onto North and South Towers of the World Trade Center, respectively. American Airlines Flight 77 crashed into the Pentagon. United Airlines Flight 93 was targeted at Washington, D.C., but crashed into Shanksville, Pennsylvania, thanks to passengers who overcame the hijackers. What were the immediate effects of the 9/11 attacks on America?
The biggest change was probably just watching people care, people fly the flag, people seemed to pay more attention. It just seemed to draw awareness to America, to our privileges, to our freedoms. I'm sure it does directly for the people who were, firsthand affected by it, whether it be people who lived there or was involved in the cleanup.
On the day, September 11th alone, there was at least $10 billion in property and infrastructure damage. It was the deadliest incident for firefighters and law enforcement officers in history of U.S., and there was a total of 2,996 casualties. While all these events made a large impact on the U.S. in one day, the following events made an even larger impact of much greater magnitude through the largest restructuring of the U.S. government in contemporary history and American conceptions, fundamentally changing society as we know it today. Firstly, the U.S. government passed many laws regarding the national security. For example, the Homeland Security Act of 2002 created the Department of Homeland Security in order to monitor and prevent terrorist activity and attacks. Congress also passed the USA Patriot Act, or the Uniting and Strengthening America by providing appropriate tools required to interact and obstruct terrorism Act. The National Security Agency and Transportation Security Agency were given broad powers to combat future terrorism. Additionally, the U.S. and other NATO countries became involved in a global conflict against Al-Qaeda and other militant extremist organizations known as the War on Terror. Since its announcement on September 20th, 2001 by George W. Bush all around the world, from the invasion of Afghanistan to get rid of the Taliban, or the Afghan government to operations in Africa.
Our war on terror begins with Al-Qaeda, but it does not end there. It will not end until every terrorist group of global reach has been found, stopped, and defeated.
While initially much of the American public supported the war on terror, immediately after the attacks, support dwindled as more and more troops were deployed and money was spent. The war on terror began to decrease in intensity after the death of Osama bin Laden through the U.S. mission Operation Neptune Spear on May 2, 2011, especially after Barack Obama's statement in 2013 saying the war on terror needs to be refocused on American threats. However, the U.S. is still deeply rooted in Middle Eastern conflicts. For example, ISIS, or the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, has begun to overshadow its offshoot, Al-Qaeda, and has become a major topic in American foreign policy due to their kidnappings, murders, and destruction of archaeological sites. As of right now, there have been 6 recorded executions of American journalists, and even more from other Western countries, and unrecorded killings. Lastly, 9/11 had a large impact on culture too. Because of this new paranoia, many people became racially discriminatory towards Muslims, Middle Easterners, and South Asians due to association with terrorism, extremism, and 9/11 attacks. Some examples of this discrimination are in airports, the workforce, and retail and service.
From a Muslim perspective, right, I don't think that that's necessarily synonymous with terrorism, but from a Muslim perspective, I think that since then they've understood that that they have to, they're speaking out more, right? They're saying, hey, this isn't necessarily our religion, right? There's this aspect of it, or this cell that believes one way, but it doesn't represent maybe Muslims as a whole. And so I think they've had to kind of get into the conversation a little bit more.
We all remember 9/11 for a reason. The chant is cried every year, because it is one of the most important events in contemporary history, and it affects every one of us around the globe.
Yeah, listen. They call me Mr. Divine.
Sleeping through the day,
Yeah.
wake up with champagne, brought me an A. I told
No,
my
I had to
mother
cover
I
this
would
song.
quit. What can I say? I'm still breathing,
It's kinda underrated if
falling
you
in
ask me.
love every evening.
Let's go.
So we just gonna stay teenage dreamers on this way. I told my my mother, I grow
my
up. What
doggy
can I
and
say?
I do my
I'm
doggy
still
and I.
breathing, falling in love every
Listen, I
evening.
can't sit around venting to my girl no more. I'm trying to get out and dominate the world for sure. I'm trying to give these guys lines they won't think to ignore. And just to rap for some change, I'll fly to Singapore. Tired of laying on my back, thinking about these artists. Trying to understand why the hell they bigger than Marvin. When Marvin got the flow and Marvin got the rhythm, why they ain't got Marvin. Marvin just don't get it. Remember at 17, I spoke to Mary J's label. Too hungry to know, they fed fables. Eddie F said the mixtape was dope. He sent me a hot beat and he told me to flow. When I ain't get the green light, something told me to